Hi, kitty cats. It is still Pride Month, and I think it's worth reflecting on both the pros and the cons of gender transition. While your experience transitioning will certainly be different from mine, nobody makes it through a gender transition completely unscathed. So today what I want to talk about are the peaks and the valleys associated with social and medical gender transition. So let me first introduce myself. I'm Dr. Amethysta Herrick. I am both an author and a podcaster, and I discuss identity and gender from a scientific standpoint. You can actually check the link down there, for more information about me and the work that I do. My website, first of all, is purplepockland.com. You can see it's right there. You'll be able to find links to all my social media networks if you want to follow me there, which hopefully you do. And you can also read all of the articles and view the podcast that I do. Also, if you like this content, I hope that you would consider subscribing. You can subscribe at purplepockland.com. You can get a subscription for as low as $5 a month. And you'll find that I also publish articles and podcasts by other contributors as well. And so if you're interested in contributing your original work about both identity and gender, I encourage you to email me. And once again, it's going to be the same website. There's a contact page at purplepockland.com. So first of all, let me say hello, Brenda. I hope that, some purple energy brings you some good, because that's what I'm bringing to you here. All right. Last week when I did a live stream, I talked about an article that I wrote. It was 2 years ago that I wrote this article, and it was about Pride Month. It was the first article. It was really the first engagement I ever had with Pride Month. And so I figured, as long as I'm revisiting one article from 2023, I also want to revisit an article I wrote in August of 2023. Before I move forward on any of this, I want to state unequivocally that gender transition has been one of the most amazing experiences in my entire life. I credit transition for opening my eyes to everything around me, to life around me. Today, I can tell you, I want to live. I want to live fully. I want to live fully in this world. I am today very happy with everything this journey has brought me. And when I'm thinking about everything that this journey has brought me, not every experience has been, I think, what we would consider strictly positive. There's no doubt I've had to challenge myself many times as I've done this, challenge myself to push through things, challenge myself to think about how I've interacted with the world, and I've had to rewrite many patterns of my own behavior. Now, for what it's worth, I think that rewriting my understanding of myself, challenging myself, has actually become easier than before transition. So I think it's been easier because now, after gender transition, I have more ability to focus on what goes on around me, and I have more ability to feel what goes on inside me. And those are very important aspects of a gender transition. Almost everybody who starts gender transition suddenly goes, wow, I didn't know there were emotions that were out there. Now, that being said, being able to feel what's going on inside me means that I can hurt. And there are times when I've felt very, very hurt. What used to be drowned out just by gender dysphoria now gets through to me. So to sum this all up, just want to say, I certainly do not regret transitioning gender. And transitioning gender has forced me to learn some very difficult lessons. Good lessons. Very good lessons. So let me return to this article that I wrote almost 2 years ago. Believe it or not, I'm actually forgetting the name of it. I forget the name. The point here is that with the first article that I wrote, that Pride article was talked about the very first challenge I had to my gender transition. And just to set the stage on timeline, to remind everybody, I put on that first estrogen patch in July of 2022. My entire experience, for the most part, most people were very positive. If they weren't very positive, they were mostly positive. And if they weren't mostly positive, they seemed kind of neutral. And so when I got an email in June of 2023 that challenged my gender transition, it was, it was difficult on me. Because by that following June, when I got that, my social transition was complete. Like, I changed my name, driver's license, social security card, all of my bank records, even going to loyalty programs at restaurants like you do. I had gotten a new wardrobe. I had taken makeup lessons. I had gone through voice training. By June of 2023, even my birth certificate had been updated. In fact, for that matter, by June of 2023, I had purple hair. By then, I'd even had the purple hair, although it hadn't been cut into this sort of, what's now become sort of my signature look, this bangs and everything. So I reached a point, the way that I would say this is by June of 2023, I had reached the point where I had heard the way the transgender community puts it, it's that point where we just live. I'm going to put that in quotation fingers. You'll notice I really love quotation fingers, right? So this is the point where we just live. And this is a very important point. I want to return to this, or I will return to this a few times over the course of this discussion, because I think that the transgender community has this kind of idealized meaning of just living, that we think of it as sort of a paradise. And what's interesting is that before we get there, nobody really seems to know what it means. It sort of seems to imply that we'll never have to worry about anything ever again. You transition gender, all feelings of discomfort go away. And that's it. You're done. You transition gender, all the problems you had, they go away. Hi, Lizzie. Good to see you here. I'm glad you love quotation fingers. So I had thought that I had reached this point of just living. And it's interesting because by August of 2023, so this was not Pride Month, although there were, still Pride celebrations going on, by August of 2023, I found myself getting increasingly depressed. And it actually got really, really dark in there. I'm not actually going to talk about everything that happened if, just to keep this live stream from being flagged. But the other thing is I didn't really want to revisit some of those feelings that I was feeling, because they weren't good ones. It wasn't great. Now, obviously you can see I made it through, because here I am talking. But what I didn't do at that time was address what really caused my depression. I mean, pretty much really what happened was I ignored the symptoms long enough that I was able to forget them. So, you feel pain, and it's never fun, right? I mean, but you feel this pain, and sooner or later you go, okay, maybe I can get on with my life. So, it was a sense of depression. And the other thing that I would say is that by late 2023, I also began focusing on a new goal. In August, I launched a new business. So I was starting to work on that, and a website and various other things. But I was also starting to focus on bottom surgery. That was sort of a new goal, and I will get there in a sec. But having these new goals gave me something else to focus on. So I didn't have to think about, the whole gender transition process. I didn't have to think about just living, I think is the better way to put that. Now I could focus again on something related to gender transition. So having these goals helped me get through these issues, but absolutely brought with them some new issues, which I will now discuss. So first of all, it's been 10 minutes, and there's now an FCC mandated station identification. Just a reminder, I am Amethysta Herrick. Right now, what I'm talking about is how gender transition didn't exactly bring regrets, but certainly has challenged me in ways that I never expected that I'd have to be challenged. So what happened? What happened here with these new issues? So I mentioned both of these. So I started building a business, and I was thinking about getting bottom surgery. Now, building the business I had expected. I retired from the technology industry after 25 years to do this. to do content creation. I started off by writing, and then I went into podcasting, and I went into making videos and some live streams here. And so, that's evolved over the years, and especially the business, going purely from content creation to trying to help people directly. And so now that evolution has actually, come together, gosh, in the last month, really. It was almost 3 years into what I'm now calling, hypnotherapy-driven identity guidance. I'm going to say flat out, I never planned to get bottom surgery. I never expected to get bottom surgery. It was kind of strange. It kind of sneaked up on me in the summer of 2023. I had never had surgery before. There were a couple of reasons I didn't want surgery. The first of which is that I'd never had a major surgery before. Like I'd gotten my wisdom teeth taken out, and that's about it. So the idea of even going and getting surgery was not even just a bit scary. It was a whole lot scary. The other thing is that I didn't believe I needed surgical intervention to be happy with my gender transition. I'm looking at a comment right here that says, "Why did this pop up in my feed? Americans really are sick," from somebody named Legend. It's interesting. Are you Legend? Interesting. So we're sick, apparently. We're sick. Although for what I just said here, I didn't believe I needed surgical intervention to be happy. I don't know if that's a manifestation of sickness or what, but this was ultimately my first indication that gender transition never ends. At some point we achieve new goals, but as we do that, all we're doing is laying old pain to rest. As we learn to see the world, because we've been viewing the world through the pain of these old patterns. We're viewing the world through the lens of these old patterns. And as we learn to view the world without this old pain, now we just find there's new pain. It may even be older pain. It may be newer pain. It doesn't really make a difference. But the point is that we start to see the world, and then we see things that don't correlate with how we wish the world went. So Legend says Ronaldo is a legend. Yeah, more than likely. I wish I knew who Ronaldo was. And I guess I'm also curious too, Legend. You're sticking around. You said, "Why did this pop up on my feed?" And here you are, interacting with me. So I do appreciate that. Hopefully you'll stick around. I hope you'll actually listen to this and go, "Oh, wait a minute, maybe this person isn't entirely sick." So as we see the world through this new lens, what we understand is that we just weren't able to see some of these new patterns, or some of the new way that we interact with the world, because we were really blinded by old pain, old patterns. So at this point, I'm not going to, I mentioned going and getting bottom surgery. I'm not going to talk about that entire process. The entire process of going to Thailand, I've documented that both, on 2 platforms already. On YouTube in particular, there's a playlist called Ami in Thailand. If you go to my profile, you'll see that, and you can follow that whole process there, that whole journey there. In fact, for what it's worth, I've got, let's see, today's the 22nd. I have about 2 weeks, well, not quite 3 weeks, before this surgery will be a year old. It's something to talk about pretty soon. A year old. So I've documented that whole thing. That journey was a bittersweet experience. Originally I thought it was going to be done in the United States. I couldn't get insurance coverage. So that was kind of bitter, but the sweet part was going to Southeast Asia, where I felt so accepted and so beautiful. I was just treated as like a person. And it was truly an amazing thing. It was truly an amazing thing. So the other thing I learned in that process was that the U.S. healthcare industry, unfortunately, is nowhere near what it claims. We're told anyway. We're told that this is the best place in the world. Come and get your health care in the United States. And not really true. In fact, not close to true, which is a shame. So I found that when I got home, I think it took a couple of months. I think it might have taken a couple of months. So we may have been looking at about August of 2024. I found that that surgery that I never expected to want, that it was a vital step in my transition. I actually addressed dysphoria. I'm going to hold back from saying body dysmorphia, but I did address some gender dysphoria I didn't even know existed. I was really surprised to find that. Now, I'm not going to say this is an endorsement. I don't want this to be an endorsement for surgical information or surgical intervention. This is my story, only my story, and it turns out surgery was important to me. And now I really, really expected I'm just going to live. Right now I've hit that just live place. I'm all finished. I finished my social transition by summer of 2023. I finished my medical transition summer of 2024. There were literally no more goals on my list. I got nothing to check off on my list, like my gender transition list. It's done. Completely done. And once again, I think that since I had conquered that major goal, I found myself in a little bit of a decline. Like a sense of decline. In fact, I still feel like I'm in a little bit of a decline, almost a year later. But maybe I've hit, that lower point, that lowest point. And I think now it's become relevant to revisit the insight I had that first time in 23 about the psychological benefits to gender transition. So Legend, I wanted to finish up what I was saying here before I addressed your comment, because Legend makes the comment, studies prove that many trans individuals regret hormones, puberty blockers, and surgery. Studies from medical experts. So I want to, I don't know who the medical expert you're talking about is. Perhaps you're talking about Hillary Cass, who seems to have lost the data that went into the Cass report. And maybe you haven't seen the 2022 United States Trans Survey, which actually studied 92,000, a few more than 92,000 respondents on their experiences transitioning gender. As it turns out, Legend, and hopefully you're still here, as it turns out, there was some regret. And that regret came because as somebody began transitioning gender, they experienced transphobic people around them and just made it too uncomfortable for them. Out of 92,000, this is, I believe I'm quoting this statistic correctly, out of 92,000 people, it was a 0.4% regret. Okay, are you hearing this, Legend? 0.4% regret regarding the medical interventions, including hormones, puberty blockers, and surgery. A new study just came out from medical experts, by the way. New study just came out that has followed, at this point, only 70 individuals. But 70 is a whole lot more than zero. Followed 70 individuals over the course of, I think it's been 20 years. I don't remember the exact duration, but whether or not puberty blockers affected like sexual performance and sexual satisfaction in particular, and found that there was absolutely no difference in dissatisfaction or performance than with cisgender people who had never undergone puberty blocker treatment. So, Legend, I appreciate the input there. Unfortunately, what you're parroting is politicians, what politicians say. Turns out I'm actually a member of the World Professional Association for Transgender Health, and if you'd like to have some conversations about that, I'm certainly here to do that. For what it's worth, it's part of what I'm doing right now. So anyway, Legend, I do appreciate that. Hopefully I've addressed those concerns at least a little bit. Lizzie has said happy birthday to my lady bits, right? I'm going to have a little cake and everything. All right, so Brenda makes the point. Brenda makes the point, being transgender is just an aspect of our lives. It's no more a sickness than being a blonde or liking redheads. So I stand with you entirely on this, Brenda, and that's something that I guess I needed to address. Not I guess. It was something that I had to figure out because, when you come into the community, this was my experience. It doesn't mean that, it doesn't mean that this is true for everybody. But as I started coming into the community, the prevailing attitude was that at some point you just, like, this was the best thing for you and everything's going to work out great. I'm finding that isn't entirely the case, but I think that's part of what you're saying there, Brenda, is that it's not a sickness and it's not like a strange experience. And I'm going to return to that because I want to deconstruct what has happened now twice as I made these changes that I thought would only be positive. But now that I did just get something from Legend, and actually I'd like to read this. So Legend says, I don't know which pronouns are, Legend is only 19. In your generation, Gen Z, you're talking about, so many people are non-binary and trans, which makes it seem like the agenda is working. The agenda, see, that's fascinating, because what you'd rather do is blame your generation for being stupid. That they're falling for stupidity. They're falling for something that somehow you've mystically managed to dodge, that you're one of the smart ones. But I guess when I want to just make this point here. As you go through life, and I'm not going to say, oh, you're so young, things are going to get better. You'll learn when you're my age. But as you go through life, if you find what you do, because I did this for a long time, if you find what happens is that everybody you meet is stupid, doesn't know what they're talking about, if they just listen to you, their lives would be better, take a look in the mirror there. Start thinking about what might be going on inside. What are you hiding? What are you worried about? Why are you the expert? So just something to think about there. All right, let's see. So anyway, what happened here? What happened twice? Go back to Brenda's point. What happened twice, right? August of 23 and like August of 24, that's been going on. It's been going on. What happened is I made these changes that I thought would only be positive. So now I'm going to go a little bit psychological here, and I do want to admit I do have a Ph.D., so I am a doctor. My Ph.D. is not in psychology. My Ph.D. is in analytical chemistry. My background is in biology. It was specifically genetics, and then it turned into analytical chemistry. So my background's about genetics, Legend, if you're curious. Genetics, and then ultimately experimental design, various data analysis and whatever else. I actually find myself uniquely qualified to have some of these discussions. So I'm going to talk about psychology for a moment because I want to. Let me take a quick drink. Gender dysphoria, in my experience here, having spoken to many people and now at this point having pointed discussions about it with 3 psychologists, possibly more, at least 3 psychologists that I'm thinking of off the top of my head. Gender dysphoria, in my opinion, while this is in the DSM-5 as a DSM-5 revision, text revision, while it is in DSM-5 TR or 5R as a mental disorder, I believe that gender dysphoria will also present as multiple symptoms, as multiple, symptoms. Let me leave it at that. Certainly it presents as dissociative symptoms, and that makes perfect sense. As a transgender person, I didn't associate it, at least with my presentation and how others wanted to view me, at least physically. I didn't conform to social norms, and so I couldn't associate with the person trying to fulfill those. But aside from that, when your social environment continues to tell you you're wrong, you know who you are, and your social environment goes, oh, well, that couldn't possibly be true. That dissociates you entirely from your own mind, from your own experience. You don't even believe that you own your life. You don't own your body. So, dissociative symptoms. Gender dysphoria, I believe, also can present just as social anxiety symptoms. If you think about it before transition, if you go before transition, we worry we don't live up to these social norms. And so for what it's worth, that's what I consider the root of gender dysphoria, is social norms and our expectations, the expectations placed on us to fulfill these social norms. And so this is why I believe, at least in my own theories of gender and identity, this is why I believe gender dysphoria is a common human experience. not just a transgender experience. And for what it's worth, we just had a very fascinating opinion handed down by the Supreme Court of the United States that codifies the idea that gender dysphoria is something that could absolutely occur to cisgender people. And so I have an article I'm planning for next week, but it was a fascinating opinion. And then if you look at after transition, what we do is we worry we still don't live up to social norms, but now they're different social norms. How's your voice sound? How's your hair? Do you have enough hair? Are you wearing the right clothes? Did you learn how to do makeup when you were 13 or 43? We worry about these things, especially today, where we're looking at hate and discrimination just running rampant. As this new administration has come in, some people are finding themselves empowered with the ability to disempower us. So I want to look at some of these comments here. I have plenty more to say on this, but let me see. So Legend has made the point. Notice how gay and trans populations increased these recent years. Why is that? Because they're pushing it out on us. I know 2 people who said they were trans men because it was a trend. All right. You're 19. Here I am going to pull the age card on you. I grew up in the 1970s. You don't know what it was like in the 1970s to be queer. It was very hard. You're not going to admit that. It was very difficult to admit that. And if you look at Gallup polls from that time, gosh, I'm trying to think of the time span. I mean, it was about 20 years, not even 50 that I'm talking about here. But if you go back not that very long, a Gallup poll that said, do you live openly in your queer identity, not that long ago was 3.5%. And so, Legend, you have now said that it's an agenda being pushed on it. It has increased. That's true. It's nearly tripled. In fact, the most recent Gallup poll, I talked about this on a video just yesterday. So maybe go and check that one out, Legend. It turns out in the United States, now 9.3% of Americans live openly in their queer identity. Do you think that's just agenda? Because I want to ask you this question, Legend. Do you think my life has gotten easier since I transitioned gender? Has it gotten easier that I go into these forums so that you can take pot shots at me? Because believe me, especially in the United States, it is not the case that our lives have gotten easier. When I was queer, and I was pretty out about being both transgender and pansexual in the mid-1990s, 1994, I believe, by the time I accepted all of this about myself, and I would have been 24 years old, right about the time you're thinking, right, Legend? It was more accepted in rural Georgia than I think it is in metropolitan Los Angeles today. This is not an agenda. These are people who have now been empowered to live their lives. It's not just a trend. I mean, that is something that has been actually pretty consistently disproven over the past 10 years. So let me see. So now Legend says, do you think it's perfectly healthy for a male to take synthetic hormones and get breast implants based on how they feel? That's mental. Okay, you have not had this experience. Perfectly healthy. So you say male, which implies to me that you think there are specific genetics both for male and female sexes you're talking the human species in particular here. But you'll notice, I did mention my background was genetics, didn't I? If you go and look at the Human Genome Project, Legend, maybe you will. I think it's humangenomeproject.org, might be .com. But if you go and you look at this, you'll see there's only one genome. So ask yourself the question, why? Why would that be, Legend? The reason is because the only thing that distinguishes me from any other human assigned female at birth is 1/2 of one chromosome, okay? Or 1/2 of one chromosome pair. Pair 23, 1/2. And that 1/2, which we call the Y chromosome, really has, on the order of about 50 genes on it. And many of those are duplicated elsewhere. The biggest and most important one is actually the SRY gene, which is on gene 23, Y chromosome if it's present. But everything else, all of the allosomes, that's 22 out of 23 chromosomes, all of the allosomes are identical. So your question, do I think it's perfectly healthy? Well, for what it's worth, it's actually perfectly natural to respond to estradiol because my genetics are no different, because that's how it works. That's the human genome. That's just biology. It's basic biology, as I've been told, right? So that is not mental. I will say again, if you haven't had this experience, I understand if maybe it's difficult to understand. But I'd love to have like an actual conversation, because I'm willing to bet there were social norms you failed to fulfill, and it hurts. I'm willing to bet that. I don't know if you ever played Little League. Maybe you played cricket. It sounds like you're in the UK or somewhere else than the United States anyway. The point is that when you maybe you played cricket, maybe you didn't manage to hit the ball or whatever, and that hurt because little boys are supposed to be good at cricket, yada yada. So anyway, I'm sure that there were times when you had social norms you failed to fulfill. Same here. The end. I think that is natural. Yes. So Grief Foundation, I see some of your comments. I'm going to get to them, but so let's see. One of the things that you do say, and I think it's an important point. Grief Foundation makes the comment, "I'm not sure GD is even a singular condition, let alone has a single etiology. Often we may be treating a traumatic symptom without addressing the underlying trauma." I don't entirely disagree. Because I believe a lot of gender dysphoria is behavior-based. It's behavior, we experience trauma by wanting to express certain behavior, and our social environment prevents us. And this is based on, ultimately, a sex assigned at birth, which is not really the way to establish an identity. But for what it's worth, Grief Foundation, I do agree with you, and that's a lot of the work that I've thought about over the past almost 3 years. It just so happens, I guess I don't know, but if you went and read all of my articles, I'll run it on 100 and something, 70 articles, 100 some odd articles. But yeah, I've treated this, several times, and I agree with you. So, all right, here we go. And to go back to that, actually, Grief Foundation, because it's a good point. All of us, as we grow up, we develop patterns in childhood that stick with us. This is a model now, model of psychology that our mind bifurcates, right? Like everything bifurcates. Who uses words like that? But it bifurcates into a conscious mind and into a subconscious mind. This is how our minds just develop. That is totally natural. And some of these patterns that we establish when we're young, some of them are, you could say good. Some of them gave you behavioral patterns that are functional in your life. The sort of canonical example is when you go running toward a street and you go, "Oh, I got to cross the street." You always stop and you look. Right? You look both ways. In fact, I even just did it with the 3, right? You go, nothing there, confirm, go. That is a pattern that was established because, I'm sure somebody got very angry whenever I'm running toward the street when I was a kid. That one's good. That one's a functional pattern, but we do establish patterns that can be dysfunctional. I have plenty of dysfunctional patterns, and but the point of the matter is that when we establish those patterns, they served a purpose. They were good, at least at the time. But you may notice I'm no longer 7 years old. And many of the patterns that I established when I was a child, and what all of you listening established as a child, many of those patterns are no longer relevant, yet they still affect our behavior every single day. Because it's just the way the mind works. There's nothing magical about this. What it is just how psychology works. We have a subconscious, we have a conscious, and we do have patterns that we establish in the subconscious that express themselves daily. So what happens? Here, what happens as we go through gender transition? I am going to reiterate. I'm going to reiterate. This is the most beautiful self-care I have ever done. I have been able to address very, very low-level ideas of my identity that never served me. Never. I can look at myself in the mirror and actually see who I am. I recognize that person now. And if you haven't had that feeling where you look in the mirror and you go, what is that? Maybe you don't get this, but I look in the mirror and I recognize myself. That's pretty powerful. I actually feel like who I am in my body now. And again, if you've never struggled with this idea that your body's working against you, you may not get this. But feeling at home in my body, that happens now. And bear in mind, that's 50 years that I did that I felt outside of my body. So I cannot overstate the importance of these two new feelings within me since I began gender transition. We know, as Brenda says right here, Grief Foundation, that is why gender therapy is a recommended step in transition. We know that addressing gender dysphoria saves lives. I'm just going to say it flat out, it certainly saved mine. There's some other points I want to get to here. We're having a phenomenal conversation, and now I want to get to more to more comments. Just a reminder, I'm Amethysta Herrick. I am talking about gender transition and what's good and bad about it. So let's see what else we got here. Grief Foundation says, sorry, Amethyst, I think you're invoking science and legend. Sounds like possibly British equals we have Darwin and Dawkins. And I'm sorry, I'm not sure what you mean by that Grief. I'd love further qualification on that. Invoking science. So what I invoked there were actually statistics. When I was talking about legend, what I invoked was statistics. There's no doubt that interpretation of science comes from statistics, and I think we had a back and forth that I think ended up pretty healthy to me. And if your point is to say don't invoke science when I say I didn't want to, I don't know what to tell you. It's my live stream, so there you go. All right, so Brenda says, legend, it absolutely is partly mental, but partly physical as well, partly. So I'm with you on this. Brenda says she feels human for the first time in her life. Yeah, I hear that. She feels part of her own life for the first time in 55 years. I hear that. Her brain is finally not fighting against me. Yeah, right. Exactly. So let's see. I wish I knew how to say this. So Drace? I wish I knew. I should have asked you soon. But anyway, Tracy says that I'm literally breaking it down for Grief Foundation. What agenda do you think she's playing at, taking the time to explain things? I mean, it's a good point. So that being said, I mean, Grief and I have had some good backs and forth. Even in Discord, like actually face-to-face, talking. I don't think Grief's a bad guy, by the way. I just want to make that clear. Lizzie, I'm sorry, I didn't realize you didn't have those powers. Let me go back to behavioral and emotional patterns. My understanding, or let me say it like this, my experience has been that these behavioral and emotional patterns that I've gone through during gender transition are very stratified. I think that's the perfect word for it. Stratification implies to have something set down in horizontal layers like a sedimentary rock. And I think that's a great analogy, that we set these things down as rock, sedimentary rock, but it's like sandstone, or it's like limestone, or, which you can grind up to make diatomaceous earth. These are things that we can blow through. They're not really hard. So they're stratified, and they exist in layers. You have patterns that are built from very early experience at the bottom, but patterns that grow on top of them. As we live and experience are always changing social environment and our always changing life. And I think that it's human life, normal human life. Normal human life is characterized by the constant effort of pulling up these layers to see the dysfunctional patterns in our lives and to address those dysfunctional patterns. Now, for the transition, specifically for people who are going through gender transition, here's the problem that occurs. And this is for humans, but it's something that's specifically applicable to the transgender community. There's always a layer deeper than the layer you're working on. You never hit the bottom. As you integrate the lessons of each layer, you open yourself up. You open the access to the next layer down, right? You leveled up and now you get to go to the next, region in the game. And at least for me, I think specifically for the transgender community, it's really easy. Oh, here we go. Look, I'm going to use a British word here. It's really easy to be gobsmacked. I wish I grew up with that word. It's easy to be gobsmacked by what these layers hold. Because I believe the typical human experience, where you're not dissociating yourself from your life and your body and your experience, the typical human experience arms you to work through the layers below. While you gain the experience addressing one layer, you're able to apply that to the next and the next and the next. But I think gender transition is different. And I wrote an article about this one. I wrote an article about this some months ago. And again, I've talked about this with a few psychologists. What's interesting is that gender transition means you don't necessarily work through those layers. It's a fascinating thing to observe that changing our presentation, changing our pronouns, is sometimes sufficient just to address some very deep-seated patterns of identity. In this case, I'm saying identity, not behavior. Deep-seated ideas of the person we are. Change some pronouns, that's it? Now, all of a sudden, this whole layer, and it might have been a really thick layer. For me, I found it was a really dang thick layer, just suddenly floated away. It's gone away, it's off somewhere else. It suddenly disappeared, and now I'm looking at the next layer. Ooh, you know what that feels like? Pretty anxiety-provoking at the very least, because I felt like I just addressed all of the hard problems. I'm thinking to myself, I literally just addressed these problems. Why am I reaching new ones? Why do I suddenly have other problems? And I will reiterate that's because this is the human experience. We're never finished experiencing. We're never finished discovering the person we are. We're never finished evolving. So there you go. Let me look at these. Gosh, this is such a good conversation that's going on in comments. Let me see. So Angela Walker-Scott. First of all, hi, Angela. Oh, hang on. Legend says, I don't mind changing my opinion, but this has yet to make sense. NGL. I mean, that's cool. You're watching, you've now watched on the order of 43 minutes of somebody talking about this, and you have to counteract apparently 19 years of social conditioning. Again, I highly recommend, if you want, reach out to me. purplepawclan.com. I'm right here. Let's talk. I'd love to. This is my purpose. It's my purpose in life. So Angela Walker-Scott. Angela says, I was born in 1960 and you could not admit that you were trans. Whew, yep. She did not transition until she was 30 when she couldn't live a lie any longer. And there you go. That's really what it is. You reach a point where you either decide that you're going to transition and take on the blame that society is going to put on you, or you just will cease to exist. Trying to figure out how to say this without flagging anything here. Brenda says that Angela is her idol. Thanks for being a pillar of our community. Very, very true. Thank you for bringing that up, Brenda. Brenda also says she likes grief. I'm not going to read the whole thing. Brenda likes grief. Very cordial, very intelligent. Somebody she can have a conversation over coffee with. Hey, Louise, how are you doing? Louise Richardson is here. Good to see you. Yeah, Brenda's laughing at my gobsmacked. Does it not work? What if I use the word dodgy or squidgy? Does that work either? I don't know. All right. So Louise says, still evolving at 77. Ooh, right? Angela says we are all a sum of our life experiences both before and after transition. Yes, and I think that's really the point that I want to get to, because what about this idea? What about this idea that transgender people will ever just live? Those quotation fingers for Lizzie there. Can we ever just live? As a reminder, I'm Amethysta Herrick. Here I am talking about the experiences of gender transition, both the good and the bad experiences of gender transition, and how I don't think this differs from any other human experience. Because transgender people in general are no different from other people. Every single one of us, whether you're transgender, whether you're cisgender, whether you're queer, whether you don't want to admit you're queer, whether you're straight, more quotation fingers, all of us must become the person we choose to be. We aren't naturally a person. We have to become the person we choose to be. And even those people who say they don't care, maybe they don't care about how they look, maybe they don't care how they are perceived in some social environments, but what that means is they don't care about that, okay? They don't care about that, but they still care about something, because that's the human experience. Our experience is to have the world around us go on and then go, oh, there's more to it. This is not, oh my gosh, I can't believe I get to make this joke. Holy cats. This is not a Brenda Lee song. I think it was Brenda Lee. Is that all there is? No, it's never that's all there is. It's never all that there is. I hope that's a Brenda Lee song. But being able to make that reference is really, really satisfying to me. Because none of us reaches an end point. Nobody reaches some point and just goes, yep, done. Those who appear to stop developing, they didn't reach the end. All they reached was a point of stagnation. They reached a part that was difficult. They reached a part that they don't want to address. They reached a point as well where they risk obsolescence. They reached a point where they're going to be left behind, period. And this is what we see, I believe, in the people who hurt around us. You can see the midlife crisis. This is it. It's resident in the hate and the discrimination that's going on around us. It's obvious in the frantic attempts to preserve a time that may not have been great, but at least it's familiar, right? May not be great, may be horrible, but it was familiar. We don't want to lose that. We don't want to lose what's made us comfortable over the course of, I don't know how old baby boomers could be now, right? 80? My point is that nobody just lives. It's a fact of being human. So what do? Now I get to wrap things up. What do? We need to recognize, first of all, there is no end to developing your identity. As you transition gender, I'm going to tell you, as you transition gender, or don't, as you just, go through life, but as you transition gender, you got to be ready for changes that are ugly at first. I recommend the best thing you can do is to build tools, develop tools that are going to help you through these ugly times. It would be remiss of me, in fact, it would be foolish of me, not to discuss hypnosis here. I'm not going to try to make a commercial for my own services. What I will say is that what hypnosis does is it addresses behavioral patterns. It doesn't address the emotions that result in these behavioral patterns. It doesn't address the trauma that results in these behavioral patterns. But as you address the behavioral patterns, you resolve these emotions. You don't feel them anymore. You don't necessarily resolve the trauma, but it becomes much less important to you. And the best thing about it is that our brains, our human brains, it loves to tear down things that it doesn't use. And this includes patterns from decades ago that you have held on to for decades. It's easy to tear those things down, believe it or not. So to summarize, because here we go. Oh, dang, really? Louise, that's Peggy Lee? Crap. Peggy Lee. Thank you for the the correction. I'm gonna get to you, Legend. That's a good comment. I'm gonna say right now, gender transition has not been a panacea for me. Panacea meaning it cures all, right? Gender transition is not snake oil. Gender transition is not something that once you start it, everything gets better. It's not like that, because that's not the way human identity works. I will continue to evolve, and as I continue to evolve, I'm going to continue to feel pain. Now, I could say, unfortunately, but I'm not going to use the word unfortunately. Unlike before transition, the pain is worse because I feel it. It was easier to ignore pain before, and now I cannot. And believe it or not, that's a gift. It's a gift because now, after gender transition, I have the ability to develop these tools. And guess what? You also can do the same. And so there we go. That was everything that I had to present today. I got a lot of great comments here. Let me look at some of these. Grief says, thanks. Oh, for the comment. Yes, we've VC'd. So sorry. Grief says he's VC'd with Amethysta, as she said. Grief is not anti-trans at all, but do think this all needs careful scrutiny, particularly as the stakes of getting this wrong can be so high. So it's interesting, Grief, because the stakes apparently are not that high. It's like I mentioned, there was a survey just recently that shows that the puberty blockers don't seem to have that high of stakes, because when you stop taking them, you end up in about the same place as cisgender people who never took puberty blockers in the first place. Social transition is pretty dang easy. Like, you don't have to, I jumped into changing my name and everything. Actually, I didn't even jump into it. Like, I'd been on hormones for July to November, whatever that is, 4 months. I'd been on hormones for 4 months before I decided to change my name as the first step of social transition. Now, changing my name was disruptive. Well, I'm not going to kid you on that. That was disruptive. But everything else, everything that came with it, all the 4 months of hormone therapy, I could have stopped it, and I could have, just gone back on the whole thing. Surgery, much lower stakes, no doubt. But as I mentioned before, statistically speaking, it is a very, 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 very small regret rate. And to continue, I'm just going to say this flat out, Grief, to continue to pretend like this data doesn't exist is not skepticism. That's not skepticism. What that is rejection of data. That's not the way a scientist works. That's not the way, observing nature works. You can't just dismiss, like, literally 50 years that WPATH has, almost 100 years. Well, yeah, about 100 years, if we go back to, the institute that was in Berlin. You can't deny these. You can't deny Brenda, you can't deny me, you can't deny Louise, who transitioned in the 70s, I believe. You might want to correct me, Louise, if I'm wrong, but because Louise and I did a podcast, and maybe go and check that one out too when you're done watching this. But are the stakes that high? I mean, are the stakes less high for open heart surgery? Because that's got a regret rate that's higher. Are the stakes higher for knee replacement, hip replacement? Because again, these are regret rates that are higher, but you don't seem to want to jump on those. And it's a fascinating thing. And all I say is you're dismissing data, and I don't think that makes this any better. This is why we don't have a debate. All right, Legend says, God made male and female, we must trust God. I don't think I said that male and female don't exist. In fact, it's fascinating that you should bring this up, trusting God, especially given that male and female are designations given by science, not by Genesis, as I think you're trying to quote there. That's a translation that, of course, I'm sure the original Hebrew, although not being a Hebrew scholar, I'm sure the original Hebrew does not say male and female, for what it's worth. I am pretty confident that what they're talking about there are some sort of reproductive roles, if it talks about it at all. And for what it's worth, there are translations of the Bible, even the King James, that were politically motivated. The King James translation, which is 1600s, I seem to remember, 400 years ago, there were political ramifications to translating the Bible. So just, So let's see. You struggle. So Legend says I think now I understand your gender identity is he. Your pronouns would be he. He struggles sometimes with attraction to men, but guess what? I don't act on it. You can feel trans, but don't act on it. That's fascinating. Why would you not accept who you are, Legends? Why would you accept misery? Why would you accept social misery? Why would you believe that your social environment is right and you are wrong? Can I tell you who you are? Can I tell you your favorite vegetable ought to be broccoli instead of asparagus? No. Can I tell you whether or not you should be able to like men? No. That's internal. And I'm just going to say this. Legend, I hope that someday you address that you're not allowed to feel the feelings you feel. That's a bummer. I'm sorry for you, truly. Let me see. So Brenda says, and this is to confirm what Grief said, Brenda says you're absolutely right. Changing your existence should never be done lightly. Apparently I can't read. Transitioning should be a concerted, thorough effort. Yeah, and you know what? It's not like people, the incoming administration made it seem as if, you got somebody who was coming home from junior high school and dropped off at the corner strip mall, gender affirming surgery clinic and went home with a brand new vaginoplasty, which, oh my gosh, what a lie that is. It took me 52 years to get to the point where I could even do this. And even then I went through a bunch of hoops. All of the things that I've done, I've gone through a lot of hoops. This is not something that you just go, yeah, I think I'm going to go be a girl. Then done. It took me 2 years. 2 years to complete the whole thing, right? July 22 to July of 24. 2 years. And almost everybody I've spoken to has gone, holy cats, how did you do it so quickly? I mean, I was very focused. I'm the kind of person who builds plans, right? I was a project manager an executive manager in software where I had to build teams and accomplish plans. So this is not, even with my background in project planning, it was not simple. So, all right. Oh, so Drace makes a good point here. I hope I'm saying that right. Says, they're always struck by many who say that the mind of God is unknowable, only to turn around and claim they know the mind of God. Well, it's a great point, but I think the unspoken word there is that if you look at the Hebrew, if you look at what Moses wrote in the Pentateuch, those first five books of the Bible that are also in the Torah, as the literal word of God, we don't have to claim that we know the mind of God, because supposedly we've got it. And that's why I brought up translations. Because translations interpret said mind of God and oftentimes interpret them in terms of the prevailing political situation. Certainly the King James Version was, because King James apparently was very interested in boys. And commissioned the King James Bible in part as appeasement to the church at the time, because he didn't want to look like the kind of person who liked boys. Well, they didn't want him to appear as the kind of person who liked boys. So, Louise, I know you're a boomer, but you're one of the good ones. I hate using that phrase. You're a boomer, but for some reason, you don't have this really, well, I don't know, the boomer kind of attitude. I'm not sure how to put it. I mean, I have the Gen X attitude, so I'm not trying to say this is necessarily bad. So there we go. So Angela says, if you are truly trans, it comes to a point where you can't pretend to be a man when you know with all your soul that you are a trans woman. Agreed. I don't think these are things that are sort of casually tossed about. And I know that the Grief, you have said that. Well, these are casually tossed about. Legend brought up, not by name, but rapid onset gender dysphoria. That these are things that are trends, and yeah, maybe. But I do want to make a point here too, because Legend, as long as we're talking about trends, oh gosh, I'm almost out of time here, but I want to keep on going through the comments. It is a trend. Maybe you're saying that you have seen people jump on a trans man sort of trend kind of thing, but if we're going to say that social norms, the social pressures, peer pressures, have that kind of power, like, why would anybody want to be Christian? Is that not a social norm? Is that not a peer pressure kind of thing? Because, like, you get dumped on if you're not Christian. You just gave me a thing that says, well, trust God. You should trust God. I don't even believe in I believe your God exists, but I certainly don't believe that your God knows all. Certainly don't believe that your God has given you a blueprint for existence that that should or can override like all of my experience. One book is not sufficient. One book that some of which is purported to have been written 4,000 years ago, and some of which were rewritten in the 4th century. You're not going to tell me that that has every application to my entire life. Sorry. All right, here we go. So Brenda says entire volumes have been written debunking the entire gender binary. I don't want to talk about that entirely. Grief told me I'm invoking science. True, very true. I don't want to talk about the particular science of that. I have voluminous other information that you can go and look on that. But so Drace says she didn't act on the knowledge that she was trans for over 40 years. That was your real mistake. At times I wonder to myself, I'm like, how would my life have been different if I could have... I just recently talked with Louise, who is British, by the way. Lulu, there's a podcast that came out on Friday. She transitioned at 16. Ooh, 16. How different would my life have been? Very, very. I probably wouldn't be sitting here talking because I would be presumably just living. All right? I don't regret at this point not having transitioned until I was 52 because I've got a beautiful son, I've got a beautiful wife, and if I had transitioned earlier, I don't know that I would have those. I mean, I almost certainly would not have them if I had transitioned at 16. So I don't know if I'd call it a mistake. Everything happens in its time. And I think that is actually that might be a biblical quote. And it might just be the mamas and the papas, or like the birds. I don't know, but there you go. Gonna run with it. I think you're right, Louise. I think baby boomers are, I thought it was 45 to 64. That's what I thought, but close enough. Lizzie has called me Hypnothista. I'll crack up about that. There you go. Oh, good. Okay, so Louise said she transitioned in 1977. So that's a long time. It's almost 50 years ago there. So, all right. Grief Foundation says, same study of 70 found that 85% of trans women experience sexual dysfunction, most commonly failure to be able to achieve orgasm. Okay, I don't know. I didn't see an 85% for what it's worth. Once again, I'm going to point out that if you look at cisgender people, it's the same. So you can say, because it's really easy to say, oh my gosh, out of 70 people, we found 85% failed to be able to achieve orgasm. And I want to point out, you're not stating it correctly. It's not 85% of transgender women. It's 85% of people who got puberty blockers when they were younger and then stopped getting puberty blockers at some point. So it at least represent this appropriately. It's not transgender women. Okay, it's people who started on puberty blockers and discontinued them. And apparently, again, the most highly experienced sexual dysfunction, as Grief Foundation says, failure to be able to achieve orgasm. I would be fascinated to see what the statistics are. I never had any trouble with erectile dysfunction, but I would be fascinated to see why this is such a big business. Because these are probably largely cisgender people, right? If transgender people are so rare, you would figure ED must be an affliction primarily of the cisgender, right? Brenda says, I'm truly amazing. I'm not really sure where that came from, but I will just say thank you. How about that? So Shakespeare says they never transitioned, just stopped pretending. And I think that's actually the same thing, for what it's worth. I think what you mean is you never took social or medical steps. And I think that's phenomenal. They took full autonomy of their identity despite social pressure and traumas. So difficult to let go of social pressures, to ditch the whole thing. I'm amazed. I'm in awe of you, Shakespeare. Shakespeare also says, being trans is kick ass. Celebrate our joy. You'll give you a heart for that too. Totally true. This is why we have, that's why, I do these things. So, okay, so that was close. Drace, is it Dracy? Drace? All right. Brenda says Shakes, that is the ultimate truism. Let me see. Legend says he does accept himself. He just chooses God over internal damnation. I think you might have meant eternal damnation. And again, I guess I'm going to say I'll just say this flat out. If you have a God that tells you that living a crap-ass life and then a crap-ass eternal salvation is good, really think about this. All right, really think about that. And I understand, again, we've got a social norm going on here. You have your social environment. Maybe it was your parents. Maybe it's your friends. Whoever else is religious, these are your social environment. I think it's very, very important to think about that, to question that. You're 19. Think about that. You could have 60 years pretty easily that you have to hurt. That you have to hurt yourself. So think about that. That's all. Louise, I agree. Louise says she knows some progressive boomers. Very true. In fact, actually, I'll call out the Boomer Women podcast, which was a good one. I appeared on it. That's not the only reason why it was good, but all right. Shakespeare says Shakespeare says we are not a trend. We just have safe spaces to come out. Being queer isn't being beaten, arrested, and murdered out of us. Not as much. No. We've been taught. In fact, actually, it's kind of interesting. I think Gen X is where this started, especially as we started to teach this to our children, the millennials who came along, that expressing who you are is good. You don't want to be the silent generation that goes, life sucks, but I will choose life sucking over internal damnation. You don't want that. And so I actually credit my generation, talking about my generation here, for starting to make that idea prominent, that you should think about who you are, that you should. And I'm going to tell you too, because in Legend, this comes back to you. There was a time when there was no, it sounds like you're British, you're not that far out of a feudal society, a feudal system where you didn't go out of things. The only way you got out of things, as you probably know very well, is being granted a peerage, right? To be granted some title of nobility. And that was the only way that you could get out of sort of the poverty, maybe the identity that you had. And I'm going to tell you, this is a much better time. It's much better to be able to look at who you are and go, oh, you know what? I think I'd change certain things about myself. If nothing else, I just want to point out the French Revolution was all about equality, all about egalitarianism, and all about liberty. I'm not even talking about once we get to the United States, but if you look at the French Revolution, it was about we rise up against this idea that we cannot be who we are. Do you guys want me to sing something from Les Miserables now? Something like that? It's not going to happen because I don't know any of the songs. I think I saw the play. I think I saw the play on Broadway. But if I don't remember any of the songs. Oh, no, that was Beauty and the Beast that I saw on Broadway. So very different. Sorry about that. Might still have had Sarah Brightman in it or Michael Crawford. There we go, Crawford. So let's see. Lizzie says, addressing Legend, says she grew up brainwashed by church thinking she was going somewhere in a handbasket and chose to not believe God is so hateful. Agreed. I don't think God would be hateful of his own creation. That's my belief. So Legend says, okay, so Legend is neither Christian nor Catholic. My apologies. Legend is Muslim. Presumably, you know very well, Islam came from one of the tribes of Abraham. And of course, Abraham came after Moses, right? So those tribes of Abraham, went on to form Christianity, where we have in Israel now, and of course, Islam. So, it is still an Abrahamic religion for what it's worth. So let's see. Angela says it was not a trend in the 60s. It took her time to realize what was wrong. Ooh, yeah, great point. It was not a trend. And it wasn't a trend when I was growing up. Trans was not talked about, but Angela eventually realized that she was a trans woman, and it was possible to achieve. I had these feelings when I was 4. I knew this when I was 4. By 12, I knew very well I would transition gender. It took a long time to get around to it. It's all right. But I knew this by 12. It's not like this is something that, in 1982 or something, I had somebody come up and go, hey, let's go be girls together. And I went, yeah, sure. No, it was, as Shakespeare put it, let me pull it out. Being beaten, arrested. Well, in this case, I wasn't murdered, but, he was beaten out of me. He was beaten into me. You better act like this. And yet it never took. So fascinating. Shakespeare says they tried to come out at the age of 10 back in 1998. Yeah. Anyway, they're not too worried about what could have been, and they're very happy with where they are now. It's fabulous. Very good. So let's see. Yu Chan. I'm wondering who this is. I have the idea. So what did I miss? Yu Chan says. I have the feeling this is my friend Nijo. There we go. What did you miss beside the world burning? That's about it. I think it's about it. Let's see. Drace? Damn. You'd send me a thing, Drace. Tell me how to say it. All right, let's see. So let's see. Brenda says to NewChan356, only world peace has occurred, galactic travel, prosperity for everyone, but it went away. It did. There was somebody who was on a Thursday. She had a great idea and actually went to go write it down, but something else happened and she completely forgot. Anyway, hopefully somebody has read the Hitchhiker's Guide. So there you go. All right. Lizzie and Legend are having a back and forth about Allah condoning being queer. Read the Quran is what Legend says. Okay, there you go. Lizzie says, I was going to try to put this in the third person personal, and I didn't get it. But Lizzie says, Leo el querrán todos los días, pero tú no sabes que Allah sabe. There you go. All right. Lizzie says you made my comments go well. Very true. Oh, it's awesome. I love it. Legend is from Spain. Okay, well, that's cool. Hence the bilingual smack talking. Oh, well, there you are. Oh, and look at this. Ildiko Herrick has come in saying Peggy Lee. I know. I was corrected. All right. Angela says she was the same when she was 4. She tried to destroy what was down below. That seems typical. Because I know I did, and I can think of, 3 or 4 other people off the top of my head who did the same. Or did little ritual type things, to try to, that you wake up and you go, oh, thought I was going to be a girl. I think that's very, very common. And so to make it sound like it's possible that this could be transient or even just transient or just like a phase, just like a mental, bit of ludicrous, bit of bad chipped beef, I think, as Dickens put it. Like, it's not, I think it's foolishness at best, where you're still diminishing, you're still dismissing data that we've got here. And so Legend has now said, this is not smack talking. He is literally stating his opinion. And I think he says he thinks he's been respectful so far. I'm going to agree with you, Legend. You have. And again, if you ever want to have a conversation, we can have like a real conversation. Kind of hard to have a conversation when I'm the one talking and you're the one typing. But yeah, we can talk. That being said, I will say, your opinions are not, they're fueled by as many as 4,000 years worth of history here. Does that make them good? No. Does that make them better? No. And I'll give you some proof here if you want. The Holy Roman Empire, that went pretty well, right? They thought they were going to last forever. The British empires, used to be the sun never set on the British Empire. Used to be. So, just because ideas are prevalent does not make them good, accurate, beneficial, functional. I mean, I think all you have to do is look at all the pain today, and you're going to get that. You can get that impression. I'm now looking at Sophie. Hi, Sophie. How you doing? Ooh, look at this. So Brenda says, waking up hoping to be a girl hits hard. She cried about it until she shoved it deep inside. Right? That's the way. That's the way it. I think that so many of us feel that we. If we don't shove it deep inside, then we just end up, as Shakespeare says, getting beaten, getting arrested, having executive orders written against us, whatever else. I mean, throw it out there, right? So we have to shove it deep, because if we don't, we end up in pain. And we end up in pain for long, long periods, until finally we end up going, you know what, I'm not going to be in pain anymore. I do not accept that the social environment knows me better than I know myself, period. So Sophie says, look, she's on I'm live once when she's sitting around online. Imagine that. And then, so I was just about to shut it down. No, I'm kidding. I was going to go maybe another 13 minutes, but I'm glad to see you, Sophie. It's great. Oh, this is fascinating. This is fascinating. So Legend says he's not against the community. And Legend, I'm going to get to your next comment. Legend says he's not against the community. I'm going to just make that clear, that it's not even just transgender. Legend says he doesn't believe being trans is a choice. I literally am gay. I'm quoting Legend here. I literally am gay, I think. But we just believe not acting on it since it causes regret and damage. And I guess all I'm going to say, Legend, is think about the regret and damage that I felt for 52 years. Right now what I'm doing is, I think I'm shoring up some of that regret. I'm shoring up some of that damage. I hurt myself for other people's opinions of who I should be. And I guess all I'm going to try to say here, Legend, is that there is regret, there is damage, no matter what. It's not going to be something that, you are regretting and damaging right now. You're saying you literally are gay, you think, but you're going to accept this pain because there you go. So Legend then finally also asks, I debunked one study, not the other ones. So I'm not trying to debunk any particular study. The UK, so first of all, the UK did ban, NHS England, of course, commissioned the CAS review, originally with the intent, NHS England, sorry, I should probably be more specific here. If you're not from the UK, like me, NHS England is different from NHS, the National Health Services? National Health? I don't know. Close enough. So there is a National Health Insurance Service, way to get health care, and then there is NHS England, which is actually the budgeting and planning part of NHS. I'm making this distinction for a reason. The CAS review was commissioned by NHS England. It was commissioned by the people who had budgetary and fiduciary control and concern. This is important, right? It wasn't doctors. Who said, you know what, we're really concerned about this whole gender transition thing. Like, what's going on here? It wasn't doctors who brought this. It was politicians, and it was people who said, are we spending too much money on this? Now, I'm going to go out on a limb here. And this only comes because, I've been in executive management. If you set out to look for ways that you can save money, you know what? You're going to find them. You're going to go, well, I mean, my background is, my management was in software, right? you're going to go, well, to like, what does QA bring us? Like, does quality, do we really need a quality product? Is that really important? And the answer is yes. Don't, so if you're joining in, and by the way, I'm Amethysta Herrick talking about gender transition and the goods and bads about it. But if you're in software, yes, QA is important. But so to go where you're going, the CAS review did indeed, its intent was to determine the efficacy of gender-affirming treatment, gender-affirming care. And ultimately what they ended up doing was saying there was no efficacy, and so NHS England could save some money. NHS England could and should save some money. Now, I brought up, incidentally, that the part of what they did was, so they did have their own, there was some original research that they did there. And that data should certainly be available. I don't know what it's called in England. In the US, it's called the Freedom of Information Act or Freedom of Information Law, so FOIA. There is something similar in the UK, Freedom of Information. This should be, because it was a government-commissioned study, all of that data, the raw data, should be FOILable. We should be able to get that online. We should be able to see that data. NHS England said it never got it. That's fascinating. Hilary Cass says she doesn't have it anymore. I'm not making any comment of this because I don't know, frankly. But this whole review is somewhat cast into, it's in a weird place now. I mean, if you're a scientist, if you go into this saying, I'm a scientist, right? She's got an honorary doctorate degree for her work as a nurse. Oh, she's a scientist, supposed to be a medical scientist. Dude, but who takes their lab book and goes, you know what, I probably don't need this anymore. I just did one of the biggest and most important NHS England commissioned studies of all time that actually is relatively, controversial and has made a lot of people send, death threats my way. I'm just going to toss that out. Come on. No scientist does that. So there are some concerns. What is this data? Where did this data come from? I could talk about the quality of the data, but first I'm going to cough. I could talk about the quality of the data, the experimental protocol. I did mention my Ph.D. is actually in analytical chemistry, so that entailed experimental design, data acquisition, data analysis. So I could talk about those things, but I'm not going to. I've talked about them elsewhere. The supposedly quantitative data still was based on a doctor's subjective evaluation. It resulted in a yes or a no, so it was binary. You could count them, but it was still subjective and it was called evidence-based because it brought about a number. Does the number have any significance? That's a good question. So, all right, Sophie Dara, no. Oh, for some reason I thought that was a V. How did I mess that up? Sophie says she's been learning about gay pirates and the shenanigans they got up to evading the English crown, and it turns out pirating was probably a good prospect for people who we might call out of the closet in today's terms. Sorry, I didn't realize it was right below. I was like, well, what do we call them? I had no idea. That's fascinating. Really? Gay pirates. There you go. So let's see. Angela says, we all regret that we didn't transition earlier. Yeah, it was yes and no. I think yes and no. Sophie says it turns out the older she's getting, it seems more likely, very likely, sorry, the sort of under the tables or playing the game in the other direction path that I'm semi-getting used to has probably always been the way, that us gay and trans people have always thrived in the most because of ideology. That's a fascinating point, and I am not entirely equipped to say this very well, all right? I'm just... What happened, so I have a friend, Dr. Redfern John Barrett is his name, and their PhD, their doctoral dissertation was about when did gay turn bad, right? When did gay turn bad? And what they came up with was that in the Victorian era, a Victorian period is not an era, It's not like T-Rexes walking around, you know. But in that period, hygiene started becoming much more important because you had the Roman baths, right, in London. And as people started moving into the cities, hygiene became much more important. And presumably, if you live in London, if you live in the UK or Europe at all, you have the history of the Black Plague twice, which was pretty important, right? So anyway, that's when things seemed to change. So not that long ago, because if you look historically, the queer community used to be powerful. You know, we used to be the ones who were the oracles. We were the ones who and with even bigger point, we were the ones who conferred sovereignty, right? We were the ones who determined whether or not somebody should be king, somebody should lead. And that's largely because we were oracles and seers. But this is a much more modern thing. But we forget history, and it's really easy. I mean, gosh, you know, Susie Izzard had a funny bit at one point. Susie, who used to be Eddie, so we're going to go there. Anyway, so Susie Izzard had a bit about where, you know, she made the point. She says, I'm from Europe, where the history is from, and then says, you know, in America, though, you know, they go, look, we've preserved this as it was over 50 years ago, and people go, no, people weren't even around then. Yes, isn't that funny? Exactly true. Anyway, so we forget our history very quickly. It's easy for us now, and in fact, there's a quote. I'm not sure exactly how the quote goes, but that it only takes 3 generations to forget a very, very important lesson, whatever that lesson might be. So, anyway, yeah. So it didn't used to be this way. So I'm going to move down just a little bit here. So Legend does say, you're right, I don't understand the trans experience. I wonder why you keep saying I'm going to have regret not being who I am. Have you seen the gay life just filled with sadness? My friend, have I seen the gay life? Yeah? Filled with sadness? No. Have I seen the gay Muslim life? No. No. Have I seen transgender sex workers in Turkey, where they get, you know, very bad treatment on a daily basis? Well, I haven't seen it personally, but have I talked to people in that? Yeah, it's pretty yucky. So, hey, Erica just got here. Grief Foundation, God, I've got 3 minutes. I was going to go in 3 minutes. Grief Foundation says, what about the other systematic reviews? The 2 at McMaster in Canada, the Finnish one, the Swedish one, all come to the same conclusion. Okay, so all of these, certainly the Finnish and the Swedish one, again, were government-commissioned studies, likely with the intent of saving money. Once again, I will also point out, what about the systematic reviews that come to different conclusions? I mean, you want me to like tear down systematic reviews that are actually in the minority. Maybe you remember, Grief, Health and Human Services, so the Department of Health and Human Services in the U.S. just recently released their own version, essentially, of the CAS review. In their own words. So I've read this thing, okay? Not the whole thing, because it was really not worth the read. But their experimental protocol says they took 2,700. There's a little more than 2,700 systematic reviews. This is just the literature, okay? It may not even be exhaustive for that matter, but there were 2,700 systematic reviews. 2,700. So you've now mentioned, Grief, 4 out of 2,700. So HHS, when they did their study, excluded everything except for the 17. Okay, 17 out of 2,700. I can count that high just with my digits. Excluded most of the data to come to the conclusions they did. So it's very easy to bring up systematic reviews that say, well, look, this supports my political agenda. This supports the agenda. And I think I mentioned statistics are always very good, very, very good at supporting political agendas. So all of those come to the same conclusion. Well, let's look at the 2,696 that came to the opposite conclusion. So Okay? All right. Legend says I have a PhD, like I say. No, I really do. I mean, that part is true. I can acknowledge there are only two sexes. So for what it's worth, the point of sex, the definition of sex, certainly has nothing to do with being human. That is something that applies to all species that engage in sexual reproduction. Are there only two sexes? It kind of depends on the species. Almost universally, although not entirely, almost universally, there are only two observed gamete sizes. And I'm going with observed here, okay? Has no matter on whether I've got a PhD or not. If you go out and you do this biology research and observe species in nature, do this same work that's been done for the past 500 years, 400 years certainly, you will observe that most species have gametes distinguished by relative size, and it appears that there are two. Does that mean there are only two sexes? Once again, I'm going to say depends on the species. In humans, it appears to be the case, because we have not observed anything that appears out of that norm. Now, your next point is, and sex and gender are the same. No, this is why you have to remember that sex is a word that applies across all species. Why do we have the word gender? We have the word gender because if you look at all the species out there to which the word sex applies, this is every species that engages in sexual reproduction, you will notice that all of them differ in genetics, all of them differ in anatomy. For instance, humans have significantly different anatomy than, say, a flower, but flowers also engage in sexual reproduction. We have gender because we have to make up the differences in genetics and anatomy and biochemistry, and that's just in the species. Within each species, every organism has its own particular genetics and anatomy, none of which can be strictly classifiable because it's just difficult. Then you end up with things where you just go, well, it works most of the time. But here's the thing. No, that's not how science works. I mentioned statistics, and we can use statistics when you look at a systematic review. When you go, we have a law of humanity that works most of the time, that is not scientific. And I'm just going to say that flat out. It's okay if you hold a political opinion. It's okay if you make up a hypothesis that appears to satisfy your political agenda. That doesn't mean your science is correct. All right, Sophie says she meant a good point about humanities learned lessons. Oh, can be short-lived. Ooh, so true. I've just got to read this. So Louise Richardson says that Popeye was actually very popular in Finland. He was strong to the Finnish because he ate his spinach. He's Popeye the Sailor Man. That was beautiful. Oh my gosh. All right, Brenda says you're not looking for information. If you want information truthfully, look at the thousands of medical papers that say otherwise. It doesn't matter what your book says. Well, Legend says not just a book, but okay. True. If you think of it as Word of God, I agree. It's not just a book. So there you go. I'm going to shut this down in just a sec. Let's see. Angela says sex works is not always a bad life if you're in control. It is good money. I want to come out and say very strongly, I am highly in support of the sex work industry. I'm even going to say industry. And here's the thing. It is good money if you can be in control. It is good money. It's, short-lived. It could be short-lived, very short-lived. But I mean, if you look at New Zealand, we don't have Margie here. Margie was talking to me about sex work in New Zealand. Obviously, if you go to like Nevada here in the United States, at the very least Las Vegas, but I think it's actually statewide, sex work is legal there and works pretty well. So this is true, Grief? So Grief says his friend's cousin started a fight on a bus when Susie Izzard was still called Eddie Izzard by calling him a poof. First of all, I've just got to acknowledge the comedy of British words, right? I remember there was a Monty Python bit about dad's poofs. It's just funny. Anyway, Grief's friend's cousin started a fight with Eddie Izzard, still called Eddie. Eddie beat the shit out of him. Really? That's hilarious. All right. So let's see. What else do we have here? Legend is a troll. I've seen them in other streams. They're hopping around, trolling. It's annoying. Well. All right. Anyway, so here we go. Well, you know what? Hold on, Sophie. I'm not going to ask Legend to go away. I will certainly say, I appreciate the feedback. I appreciate that you've given me so much to... Hang on, Legend. All right. I don't need you striking back. I appreciate that you've given me so much to talk about. It's been great. Legend, we're done. We're finished, okay? I'm just going to say enough. I appreciate that you've given me so much to talk about, although I certainly do not agree with most of what you've said. So I'm going to leave it at that. So, all right. It has been an hour and a half here. I did not expect this to go this long. I got to tell you, I thought this was going to be somewhat of a boring conversation, that I was going to rehash this this article that I wrote 2 years ago, and everybody was going to go, oh yeah, cool. So I will say thank you, Sophie, and thank you, Legend, and thank you, Brenda, and thank you, Louise, and thank you, Angela, and Grief, and Drace, and Shakespeare, and Erica, and everybody else I'm forgetting here. Ooh, gosh, I can see, and Lizzie. Hey, I can see the whole thing now. I like this new tool. I started using this new tool for streaming. It's much better. Who else? I don't think I'm missing anybody. If I missed you, then just know that you're in my heart. So I'm going to shut this down now. Thank you so much to everybody for watching. It's been great talking to you all. There's a reason why I continue to do this, and it's because of conversations like this that we must have. So that's so great. Gosh, Sophie, no need to, that's not an apology, but no need to worry. All right, Shakespeare says meow, and I'm going to say, here's a heart to everybody. And I will say, thanks so much. Talk soon, and see you next week. Bye.